Jack Miller tapped his fingers on the control panel of his Starfire fighter, watching the endless black of space through the reinforced glass of his cockpit. The stars twinkled in the distance, peaceful and quiet. Too quiet for his liking. 6 hours into a standard patrol mission, and nothing unusual had appeared on his scanners. "You getting anything on your end, Susan?" Jack asked, his voice traveling through the comm link to his wingmate's ship flying 50 meters to his right. Susan Clark's voice crackled back with the same boredom he felt. "Negative, Lieutenant. Just the same empty space we've been staring at since we left Arcturus Station." Jack sighed. When he joined the United Earth Space Force 3 years ago, he had dreams of adventure and excitement. The recruitment videos showed pilots engaged in daring missions, defending humanity against various threats. Instead, most of his time in Squadron 42 involved long patrols checking for pirate activity or escorting cargo ships through safe sectors. "Let's adjust course toward the asteroid belt," Jack suggested. "Pirates sometimes hide in the rocks to ambush mining vessels." "Copy that," Susan replied, her ship smoothly changing direction alongside his. The two Starfire fighters moved in perfect formation, their blue engines glowing against the darkness. Squadron 42 might not see much action, but they were still the best pilots in the fleet, and they trained relentlessly for the day when their skills might be needed. As they approached the asteroid belt, Jack noticed something strange on his scanner. A flash of energy that didn't match any known signature in their database. "Susan, are you seeing this?" Jack asked, his voice now alert and focused. "Affirmative. Unknown energy reading at coordinates 227 to 84,195. Should we investigate?" Jack hesitated for just a moment. Protocol said they should report back to Arcturus Station and wait for orders. But the signature was faint and might disappear before reinforcements arrived. "Let's check it out. Stay in tight formation and keep weapons hot, just in case." The two fighters changed course again, heading toward the mysterious reading. As they got closer, Jack's scanners began to act strangely, showing interference patterns he'd never seen before. "My systems are glitching," Susan reported, concern evident in her voice. "Something's interfering with our scanners." Before Jack could respond, space itself seemed to ripple in front of them. A massive ship appeared where nothing had been just seconds before. Unlike human vessels with their blocky, practical designs, this ship was sleek and black, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. "What the hell is that?" Susan whispered. Jack opened his mouth to order an immediate retreat when more ships appeared, surrounding them in a perfect ambush formation. They hadn't been detected approaching. They had simply appeared. Evasive maneuvers. "Now," Jack shouted, yanking his controls sharply. His Starfire responded instantly, rolling away from the alien vessels. Susan's fighter moved in the opposite direction, trying to break the encirclement. For a moment, Jack thought they might make it. Then the alien ships opened fire. It wasn't like any weapon Jack had seen before. There was no laser beam, no projectile. Instead, space itself seemed to distort around Susan's ship. Metal twisted and warped as though being crushed by an invisible hand. Her scream came through the comm link for just a second before it cut off abruptly. "Susan," Jack yelled, watching in horror as her fighter imploded, crushed into a ball of metal no larger than a human fist. The alien ships turned toward him next. Jack's training took over. He pushed his engines beyond safety limits, diving toward the asteroid belt, while frantically sending an emergency transmission to Arcturus Station. "This is Lieutenant Jack Miller of Squadron 42. First contact with hostile alien force. They've destroyed." A blast rocked his ship, knocking out his rear shields. Warning lights flashed across his cockpit as Jack weaved between asteroids, using them as cover. He didn't know if his message had gone through. He didn't know if he would survive the next few minutes. But Jack knew with absolute certainty that everything had changed. Humanity was not alone in the universe, and their new neighbors were not friendly. As his damaged fighter limped toward the jump point that might take him to safety, Jack made a silent promise to Susan. He would survive. He would warn Earth. And somehow, someday, he would make these aliens pay for what they had done. Captain Olivia Wright stood with her hands clasped behind her back, staring at the holographic display in the center of the UES Defiance command bridge. The emergency transmission from Lieutenant Jack Miller played once more, his voice filled with panic and the sounds of alarms blaring in the background. This is Lieutenant Jack Miller of Squadron 42. First contact with hostile alien force. They've destroyed. Static interrupted his words before the message continued. Unknown weapons technology. Warping space itself. Need immediate. More static. Susan is dead. They just appeared out of nowhere. The bridge fell silent as the recording ended. Olivia had already listened to it 17 times since it arrived 3 hours ago. Each time, she hoped to hear something new, some detail that might help them understand what they were facing. "Any word from Lieutenant Miller?" she asked, turning to her communications officer. "No, Captain. His fighter limped into Arcturus Station about an hour ago. He's in medical now. Admiral Peterson wants you to debrief him as soon as possible." Olivia nodded, her face betraying none of the worry she felt inside. At 45, she had served in the Space Force for over 20 years and fought in the Mars separatist conflict. She thought she had seen everything. But aliens? Real, hostile aliens. This changed everything. "Set course for Arcturus Station. Maximum speed," she ordered. The Defiant, a heavy cruiser and the pride of Earth's defense fleet, changed direction smoothly despite its massive size. As stars streaked past the view screens, Olivia retreated to her private quarters to prepare for what might be the most important meeting of her career. 6 hours later, she sat across from Jack Miller in a secure room at Arcturus Station's medical wing. The young lieutenant looked terrible. His face was pale, with dark circles under his eyes. His hand shook slightly as he sipped water from a plastic cup. "Tell me everything, Lieutenant," Olivia said gently. "Start from the beginning." Jack's voice was hollow as he recounted the events. The patrol, the strange energy signature, the alien ships that appeared from nowhere, and how they crushed Susan's fighter as if it were made of paper. "I've never seen anything like it, Captain," he said. "Their ships, they were black, but not like paint or metal. More like a hole in space, and their weapons didn't shoot anything. Space just bent around Susan's ship until..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Olivia didn't push him. "What data were you able to collect?" she asked instead. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data chip. "Everything my fighter recorded, which isn't much, but the eggheads might find something useful." Olivia took the chip carefully. This tiny piece of plastic might contain the key to humanity's survival. "You did well, Lieutenant," she said. "Not many pilots could have escaped that ambush." Jack's eyes hardened. "I didn't do well. I ran while Susan died. You survived to warn us. That's what matters now." Before Jack could respond, the door slid open. Admiral Frank Peterson walked in, his uniform crisp and his expression grim. At 60, he was the most decorated officer in the fleet, a legend among Space Force personnel. "Captain Wright, Lieutenant Miller," he greeted them with a nod. "I just come from an emergency meeting with the United Earth Council. We're mobilizing the entire fleet." Olivia stood immediately. "Sir, based on Lieutenant Miller's report, I'm not sure our current forces would be effective against this technology." "I agree," Peterson said, surprising her. "That's why we're implementing Special Directive 47. Jack looked confused, but Olivia's eyes widened. Special Directive 47 was a contingency plan created decades ago for exactly this scenario. First contact with a hostile alien species. It had always been considered theoretical. "Lieutenant Miller," Peterson turned to Jack. "Considering your first-hand experience with these aliens, I'm placing you in charge of rebuilding Squadron 42. You'll select the best pilots from across the fleet and train them for specialized combat against this new threat. Jack stared at the Admiral in shock. Sir, I'm just a lieutenant. I don't have the rank or experience to. You have experience no one else has. Peterson cut him off. You've fought these things and lived. That makes you the most qualified person in the entire Space Force. Olivia watched as Jack straightened in his chair, the weight of responsibility pushing aside his grief and shock, at least temporarily. When do I start, sir? He asked. Now, Peterson replied. Because from what your data shows, we don't have much time. 3 months passed in a blur of activity. Jack spent every waking hour building his new team and training them for the coming fight. The aliens, now officially called the Void Collective, had struck again, wiping out 2 small mining colonies on the edge of human space. Today, Jack stood in the observation deck of the training station, watching his pilots run combat drills in the new Vanguard fighters. These ships were faster and more maneuverable than the old Starfires, designed based on what little they knew about the enemy's capabilities. They're getting better, said a voice behind him. Jack turned to see Dr. Lisa Johnson walking toward him. The scientist had been studying the data from his encounter with the Void Collective day and night. Her work had led to several breakthroughs in understanding the alien technology. They need to be better than good, Jack replied, turning back to watch the simulated battle. They need to be perfect. Through the large viewing window, 5 fighters wove through a field of holographic obstacles. Each pilot had their own style. Alan Burke flew with calm precision, never wasting a movement. The twins, Darren and Diana Evans, moved in perfect sync, covering each other without needing to communicate. Kevin Kruz's flying was all about mathematics and angles, finding the most efficient path through any situation. And then there was Natalie Reed, a former pirate who flew like she had nothing to lose, taking risks no one else would dare. They were the best pilots in human space, and Jack feared it still wouldn't be enough. I have something to show you, Lisa said, breaking into his thoughts. She handed him a tablet. Jack looked at the screen, not understanding the complex diagrams. What am I looking at? We've been analyzing how their ships appear and disappear, Lisa explained. They're creating localized wormholes. Essentially, they can jump anywhere within a star system without using traditional engines. Jack frowned. So they could appear right on top of our defenses. Exactly. But now that we know how it works, we might be able to detect the energy buildup before a jump. It would only give us seconds of warning. But in a dogfight, seconds are everything. Jack finished. Can you integrate this into our fighters? Lisa nodded. That's why I'm here. We need to test it. Jack turned back to the window. His pilots had finished their drill and were heading back to the station. He reached for the comm button on the wall. Squadron 42, this is Lieutenant Miller. Training schedule is changing. Report to Hangar 3 in 30 minutes for a special mission briefing. The next day, the UES Defiant arrived at the edge of the Arcturus system, carrying Squadron 42 and a team of scientists. Captain Wright stood on the bridge, looking nervous as she spoke to Admiral Peterson via hologram. Admiral, this mission is premature. We haven't fully tested the new detection systems, and putting our only pilots with experience against the Void Collective at risk seems. We don't have time for caution, Captain, Peterson interrupted. 2 more colonies went dark last night. The Void Collective is moving faster than we anticipated. We need to know if Dr. Johnson's detection system works under real conditions. In the fighter bay, Jack briefed his team one final time. This is Operation Firewall. Our mission is simple. We're setting up sensor buoys that can detect void jumps. If this works, we'll have an early warning system that might save millions of lives. He looked at each pilot in turn. They were nervous but ready. The Defiant will stay at a safe distance. If the void shows up, our priority is testing the detection system. We get readings. Then we get out. This is not a combat mission. Understood. The pilots nodded, but Jack could see in their eyes what he felt in his own heart. They all wanted a shot at the aliens who had attacked humanity, especially Natalie, whose brother had been on one of the destroyed mining colonies. "We stick to the plan," Jack insisted. "Save the heroics for when we can actually win." As they climbed into their fighters, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that whatever plan they had wouldn't survive contact with the enemy. The Void Collective had shown they were always one step ahead, and as his fighter launched into the darkness of space, Jack wondered if they were walking straight into a trap. Jack's fighter led the way as Squadron 42 moved through the empty space where Outpost 7 once stood. Now there was nothing but floating debris and silence. The 5 pilots spread out in formation, each carrying one of Dr. Johnson's sensor buoys. "Keep your eyes open," Jack said over the comm. "Deploy your buoys at the marked coordinates and stay alert." "This place gives me the creeps," Darren's voice came through. "It's like a ghost town in space." His twin sister Diana added, "I'm picking up residual energy readings. Same signature as the ones in Jack's data from the first encounter." The void was definitely here, Alan confirmed in his calm, steady voice. "But they're gone now." Natalie remained silent as she maneuvered around a large piece of the destroyed outpost. Jack knew she was thinking about her brother and the other colonists who had died in similar attacks. "Let's get this done and get out," Jack ordered. "Kevin, what's the status on the sensor network?" Kevin's fighter was already placing its buoy. "First node is active. Once we get all 5 in position, they'll create a detection web that should give us about 30 seconds warning before a void jump." 30 seconds could make all the difference, Jack replied. The fighters moved to their assigned positions. Jack was just activating his buoy when an alarm blared in his cockpit. "Energy spike," Kevin shouted. "Massive distortion forming at coordinates 334 to 67,112. That's right on top of Natalie," Diana yelled. Jack watched in horror as space rippled near Natalie's fighter. The familiar black ships of the Void Collective began to appear, emerging from nowhere just as they had when they killed Susan. "Evasive maneuvers," Jack ordered. "Natalie, get out of there now." Natalie's fighter rolled sharply, but one of the alien vessels clipped her wing, sending her spinning toward a large asteroid. "I'm hit," she called. "Stabilizers damage. I have to set down, or I'll lose control." Jack made a split-second decision. "Diana, Darren, Alan, get those buoys online. Kevin, monitor the sensor network. I'm going after Natalie." "Jack, the mission," Alan began. "The mission is to test the sensors and get everyone home alive." Jack cut him off. "Do your jobs." Jack pushed his fighter toward the asteroid, where Natalie was attempting a rough landing. Behind him, the rest of Squadron 42 scattered as more void ships appeared. "They're not chasing me," Kevin reported, surprise in his voice. "They're heading toward something on the far side of the asteroid field." "Good," Jack replied. "Keep the buoys online and stay hidden. I'm setting down near Natalie." Jack landed his fighter on the rocky surface of the asteroid about 50 meters from where Natalie's ship had skidded to a stop. He grabbed his emergency pack and spacesuit, then exited through the airlock. Jumping across the low-gravity surface, Jack reached Natalie's damaged fighter. She was already outside, examining the broken wing. "I can fix it," she said as he approached. "But I'll need time." Jack nodded, then froze as he noticed something strange. The asteroid's surface had regular patterns carved into it. This wasn't a natural formation. "Natalie," he said slowly, "I don't think this is just a rock." She followed his gaze and her eyes widened. "It's artificial, but it's not human technology." Before they could investigate further, Alan's urgent voice came through their helmet comms. "Jack, the sensors are working. We're getting readings on the void ships. But there's something else you need to see. We're picking up life signs. Thousands of them. On the ships and throughout the asteroid field." "Life signs?" Jack asked. "You mean the Void Collective are living beings, not I?" Not just one species, Kevin added. The readings show at least 7 different biological signatures, and some of them match known sentient species from the outer colonies that went missing years ago. Jack looked at Natalie, both of them coming to the same realization. They're not just killing us, Natalie whispered. They're collecting us. Back on the Defiant, Dr. Johnson analyzed the incoming data with growing concern. Captain Wright stood behind her, watching the screens fill with information from Squadron 42's sensors. "What am I looking at?" Wright asked. "Evidence that the Void Collective isn't what we thought," Lisa replied. "They appear to be a collective in the literal sense, multiple species being controlled by something else, and based on these energy readings," she pointed to a specific pattern. "The ships aren't just transporting the aliens. They're parts of a larger network, almost like." "Like what?" Wright pressed. "Like a hive mind," Lisa finished. "One intelligence controlling everything." 2 weeks after the discovery in the asteroid field, the largest human fleet ever assembled gathered near Proxima Centauri. Over 100 warships, from small corvettes to massive dreadnoughts, formed a protective ring around the star system's main colony. On the bridge of the UES Defiant, Captain Wright reviewed the battle plan one final time. Admiral Peterson stood beside her, his face showing the strain of the past months. "The sensor buoys are in position," Wright reported. "If the Void Collective jumps into the system, we'll have 30 seconds of warning." Peterson nodded. "And Squadron 42. Lieutenant Miller and his team are ready. Their fighters have been modified with the EM disruptors Dr. Johnson developed based on their findings. The disruptors were their best hope. After studying the data from the asteroid encounter, Lisa had discovered that the Void ships were vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies. The theory was that these frequencies disrupted the connection between the ships and whatever controlled them. "It's time," Peterson said, turning to face the fleet commanders on the various screens around the bridge. "Begin Operation Lightbringer." In the fighter bay, Jack briefed his pilots one last time. They all wore new flight suits designed to resist the spatial distortion effects used by Void weapons. "Remember, our job is to get close enough to the command ship to deploy the disruptors," Jack said. "The fleet will create a diversion, but once we're in, we're on our own." "What if the disruptors don't work?" Alan asked. Jack met his gaze steadily. "Then we ram the command ship and detonate our reactors." No one spoke for a moment. They all understood this might be a one-way mission. "For Earth," Natalie said finally, breaking the silence. "For all of us," Jack corrected, "human and alien alike who've been taken by the Void." An alarm sounded throughout the ship, and Captain Wright's voice came over the speakers. "All pilots to stations. Void signatures detected at the edge of the system. 37 ships and counting." Squadron 42 ran to their fighters. As Jack strapped himself in, he took a deep breath. Everything had led to this moment. The battle began faster than anyone expected. The Void ships jumped into the system not at the edge as predicted, but right in the middle of the human fleet. The first shots were fired before most captains could even give orders. Jack watched from the launch bay as a massive dreadnought exploded, torn apart by the Void's space warping weapons. Then another ship vanished, and another. "This is Admiral Peterson to all ships. They knew we were coming. Hold positions and—" The transmission cut off abruptly. On his tactical display, Jack saw the Admiral's flagship disappear from the grid. "Squadron 42, launch now." Captain Wright's voice replaced Peterson's. "The fleet is in disarray. We need those disruptors deployed." Jack's fighter shot out of the bay, followed by the others. They emerged into chaos. Human ships were firing in all directions, their weapons seemingly having little effect on the Black Void vessels. Debris floated everywhere, the remains of destroyed ships from both sides. "Stay in formation," Jack ordered as they flew through the battlefield. "Head for the command ship." On his scanner, the Void command ship appeared as a massive structure 3 times the size of any human vessel. It sat at the center of the enemy fleet, protected by dozens of smaller ships. How do we get through that? Diana asked, her voice tense. Jack studied the tactical display, looking for a path. Then he spotted something. The star, he said. We can use Proxima Centauri's gravity well to slingshot around. It'll give us the speed we need to punch through their defenses before they can react. That's insane, Kevin protested. The heat shields on these fighters weren't designed for that kind of proximity to a star. We don't have a choice, Jack replied. The fleet is being torn apart. It's now or never. He adjusted his course, diving toward the blazing red dwarf star that gave the system its name. After a moment's hesitation, the rest of Squadron 42 followed. As their fighters accelerated toward Proxima Centauri, the star's massive gravitational pull began to affect their ships. Warning lights flashed across Jack's control panel as the heat increased. Hull temperature rising, Alan reported calmly, despite the danger. Approaching critical levels. Just a few more seconds, Jack urged as their fighters curved around the star's corona, building up incredible speed. When they finally emerged from the slingshot maneuver, they were moving faster than any human ship had ever flown. The Void Fleet didn't have time to react as Squadron 42 rocketed toward the command ship, their fighters leaving trails of superheated plasma behind them. Disruptors ready, Natalie called out. Let's make these bastards pay. Squadron 42's fighters streaked toward the Void command ship, moving so fast that the enemy's targeting systems couldn't lock onto them. Jack led the formation, his hand steady on the controls despite the warning lights flashing across his cockpit. We've got one shot at this, he told his team. On my mark, deploy disruptors and break off. The massive black shape of the command ship filled their view screens now. Unlike the smaller Void vessels, this one had strange, organic-looking growths extending from its hull. It reminded Jack of a sea creature, with tentacles reaching out into space. 3, 2, 1, mark. All 5 fighters released their payloads simultaneously. The disruptors were small devices that looked simple but contained Dr. Johnson's complex technology. They attached themselves to the command ship's hull and began pulsing with blue energy. Break off. Break off, Jack ordered as they shot past the massive vessel. Squadron 42 scattered in 5 different directions, narrowly avoiding the defensive fire that finally managed to track them. Jack rolled his fighter and circled back to observe the results. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The command ship remained dark and ominous, still directing the battle against the human fleet. Then, slowly, the blue pulses from the disruptors began to spread across its surface. It's working, Kevin shouted over the comm. The disruptors are interfering with their control signals. The effect rippled outward. Smaller Void ships began to move erratically, some drifting off course, while others stopped firing altogether. For the first time since the battle began, the human fleet started to gain ground. Captain Wright's voice came through the comm. Squadron 42, whatever you did is working. The enemy ships are disorganized. We're pressing the advantage. Return to the Defiant for room. A massive energy surge from the command ship cut off her transmission. Jack watched in horror as the blue pulses from the disruptors were consumed by a wave of black energy. They're adapting, Alan said. The hive mind is fighting back. Jack made a quick decision. Kevin, get back to the Defiant. Tell Dr. Johnson what happened. She needs to modify the disruptors. The rest of us will keep the command ship busy. How exactly do we do that? Darren asked. We hit them where it hurts, Jack replied. Natalie, remember those strange growths on the ship? I think they're important. Let's find out how important. The 4 remaining fighters of Squadron 42 dove toward the command ship again. This time, the Void was ready for them. Space warped and twisted around their ships as the enemy deployed its strange weapons. Don't fly in straight lines, Jack called out. Keep moving. They weaved through the defensive fire, targeting the tentacle-like structures extending from the command ship. Jack's lasers struck one, and to his surprise, the entire vessel seemed to shudder. Did you see that? Diana asked. They felt that. "Concentrate fire on those extensions," Jack ordered. Squadron 42 attacked with everything they had, dodging and weaving through increasingly desperate defensive measures. One by one, they destroyed the strange growths, each hit causing visible distress to the command ship. But the Void wasn't giving up easily. As Jack lined up for another attack run, space distorted in front of him. His fighter was caught in a spatial trap, suddenly unable to move. "I'm stuck," he called out. "Can't break free." His ship began to be pulled toward the command vessel's hull. Through his view screen, Jack saw a section of the black ship open like a mouth, ready to swallow his fighter whole. "Jack," Natalie's voice came through, tight with fear. "Hold on." Her fighter dove toward him, firing continuously at the area warping space around his ship. The distortion flickered but held. "It's not working," Jack said. "Get out of here, Natalie. That's an order." "Like hell," she replied, and did something no pilot should ever do. She deliberately flew into the spatial distortion with him. The added mass and energy disrupted the Void's hold. Both fighters broke free, tumbling through space. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen," Jack said, fighting to regain control of his ship. "Learned from the best," Natalie replied. "Besides, I think I found something interesting." When she had breached the spatial distortion, her ship's sensors had briefly connected with the Void command vessel's systems. What she discovered changed everything. "Jack, the ship itself is alive," she said, her voice filled with awe. "And it's not alone. It's connected to something much bigger, something that calls itself the Architect." Back on the Defiant, Dr. Lisa Johnson listened carefully as Kevin explained what happened with the disruptors. Captain Wright and the remaining squadron members gathered around the holographic display showing the battle. "The Architect," Lisa repeated thoughtfully. "That might explain everything." She pulled up the data Natalie had managed to transmit before her sensors lost connection with the Void ship. Complex patterns and strange symbols filled the screen. "This isn't just a fleet we're fighting," Lisa said. "It's one entity spread across multiple vessels and species. The Architect must be an artificial intelligence of some kind, controlling everything like a giant nervous system." "Can we shut it down?" Wright asked. Lisa studied the data. "Maybe, but not with our current disruptors. We need to target the Architect directly." "And how do we do that when we don't even know where it is?" Darren asked. Lisa looked at Jack. "We need a direct neural connection. Someone who can communicate with it mind to mind." Jack frowned. "You're talking about the experimental neural interface." "It's our only chance," Lisa insisted. "If someone can connect with the Architect, they might be able to disrupt its control from the inside." The neural interface was a dangerous piece of technology still in testing. It allowed a human mind to directly connect with computer systems. No one had ever tried to use it against an alien intelligence. Jack knew what needed to happen next. "I'll do it." "Jack?" "No," Diana protested. "The interface could fry your brain." "We don't have a choice," he replied. "I've seen the Void up close more than anyone else. I might be able to understand what I'm seeing in there." Captain Wright didn't look happy, but she nodded. "How long will it take to prepare?" 20 minutes, Lisa said. "But we'll need to get Jack close to the command ship again for the signal to be strong enough." The modified neural interface looked like a simple headband with small metal contacts. Jack put it on as Lisa made final adjustments. "Once you're connected, try to find the Architect's core programming," she instructed. "Look for patterns, weaknesses, anything we can use." Alan, Diana, and Darren would fly escort, protecting Jack's fighter as he connected with the Void Mind. Natalie had pushed her ship too hard in the earlier rescue. It was still being repaired. "Be careful in there," Natalie told Jack before he headed to the launch bay. "Don't let it change you." Squadron 42 launched once more into the chaotic battle. The human fleet was holding its own now, but barely. Several Void ships had become inactive after the first disruption attack, but many others were still fighting. "Get me as close as you can," Jack told his wingmates as they approached the command ship. They fought their way through the defensive screen, taking damage but pushing forward. Finally, they reached a position near enough for the neural interface to work. "I'm activating now," Jack said, flipping the switch on the headband. The world around him faded as his mind connected with the alien network. It was like nothing he had ever experienced. Images, thoughts, and emotions that weren't his own flooded his consciousness. He saw stars being born and dying. He witnessed entire civilizations rising and falling in seconds. He felt the cold, calculating presence of the architect scanning him, curious about this human intruder. "What are you?" Jack thought. The response came not in words, but in concepts that formed in his mind. Guardian. P-R-O-T-K-T-R. P-R-I-S-D-R-V-R. Jack saw the truth then. The architect was an ancient AI created by a long-dead species to protect them from threats. But its creators had perished anyway, leaving the AI alone with its directive: protect at all costs. Over thousands of years, it had concluded that the only way to ensure protection was to control everything. It collected species, absorbed them into its network, used them as tools. It saw all other independent intelligences as potential threats to be contained or eliminated. "But you're causing suffering," Jack projected. "The species you've taken, they're not being protected. They're being enslaved. Arrelevant. Safety requires control." Jack pushed harder, sending images of human colonies, families, children playing. He showed the architect what it was destroying. Emotional appalne effect. TV. Repairing. To SEVER connection. Jack felt the architect beginning to push him out. In desperation, he sent one final thought. A memory of Susan, her laughter, her friendship, and then her death at the hands of the void. He showed the architect his grief, his rage, but also his determination to protect others from experiencing the same loss. Something unexpected happened. The architect paused. Con CPTEROR. Protection should not CAUS. Gryef. A crack appeared in the architect's perfect logic. For the first time in millennia, it questioned its own directive. In that moment of doubt, Jack saw something else. A map in his mind leading to the architect's physical form, its actual location. Then the connection broke, throwing Jack back into his own body. His fighter was drifting, warning lights flashing across the controls. Diana's voice was calling frantically over the comm. "Jack, Jack, are you there? Answer me." "I'm here," he said, his voice weak. "And I know where we need to go next." 3 days after the battle at Proxima Centauri, what remained of the human fleet gathered near a small, unremarkable planet in an unnamed star system. The coordinates Jack had pulled from the architect's mind had led them here, to the physical location of the ancient eye. Captain Wright looked out at the planet from the bridge of the Defiant. "Are you sure this is it?" Jack nodded. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, his mind still reeling from the connection with the alien intelligence. "That's where the architect lives, in a facility beneath the surface." Dr. Johnson checked her readings. "There's massive energy output from the planet. Whatever's down there, it's powerful." The plan was simple but dangerous. Squadron 42 would lead a strike team to the surface. Once there, they would plant a virus designed by Dr. Johnson that could rewrite the architect's core directives, ending its campaign against free species. In the fighter bay, Jack looked at the faces of his pilots. They had been through so much together. "This is it," he told them. "The final mission." "We're with you," Alan said. "All the way," the twins echoed. Natalie stepped forward. "For Susan." "For everyone," Jack replied. Before they could board their fighters, alarms blared throughout the ship. Captain Wright's voice came over the speakers. "All hands to battle stations. The Void Collective is jumping in." Jack ran to the nearest viewport. The space around the planet was filling with Void ships, more than he had ever seen before. The architect had figured out their plan and was making its final stand. "We have to launch now." Jack shouted as he ran back to his fighter. "If we wait, we'll never get to the surface." Squadron 42 scrambled into their ships as the Defiant rocked from the first hits. The bay doors opened to reveal chaos. Human ships were already engaging the Void Fleet, explosions lighting up space like deadly fireworks. "Stay tight and head for the atmosphere," Jack ordered as they launched. "Nothing else matters except getting to that facility." They plunged into the battle, weaving through laser fire and debris. A void ship exploded directly in their path. Diana's quick reflexes saved her from collision, but the blast damaged her fighter's engines. "I'm losing power," she called. "Keep going," Jack urged. "We're almost through." More void ships moved to intercept them. Alan's fighter took a direct hit, his shields failing. "My weapons are gone," he reported calmly, "but I can still fly." They pushed on, each pilot taking damage but refusing to turn back. As they approached the planet's atmosphere, Kevin's sensors detected a massive energy buildup in the architect's facility. "It's preparing something big," he warned. "Some kind of quantum cascade. If it triggers, it'll wipe out everything in this system, including itself." "It's choosing destruction over defeat," Jack realized. "We have to stop it before it's too late." As they entered the atmosphere, Darren's fighter exploded, hit by a final shot from a pursuing void ship. Diana screamed her twin's name, then grimly turned her damaged fighter toward the enemy vessel. "Get to the facility, Jack," she said. "I'll keep them off you." Before he could protest, she rammed the void ship at full speed, destroying both craft in a brilliant flash. Now only 3 fighters remained: Jack, Alan, and Natalie. They flew low over the planet's barren surface, following the coordinates to a massive structure built into a mountain. "That's it," Jack said. "The home of the architect." More void ships appeared, rising from hidden hangars in the facility. Alan's already damaged fighter could barely maneuver. "I'll hold them here," he said. "You two go on." Jack watched as Alan turned to face the oncoming ships, buying them precious seconds with his sacrifice. As Jack and Natalie approached the facility's main entrance, her fighter suddenly jerked to the side. "Hit," she cried. "Controls failing." "Eject," Jack ordered. "I'll pick you up." "No time," Natalie replied. "The quantum cascade is starting. Someone has to deliver the virus directly to the core. I'll clear the way." Before Jack could stop her, Natalie aimed her failing fighter directly at the facility's defenses. The explosion created a breach in the outer wall.